The world wasn't ready for Captain Ibrahim Traoré. A 36-year-old military man with fire in his eyes and a storm in his voice. When he took power in Burkina Faso, many expected another puppet, another predictable pawn on the chessboard of Western control. But what they got was a wildfire. A man who didn't bow, who didn't blink. And when he finally stood before cameras and addressed the Western powers, the room went silent because no African leader had ever said what he was about to say. He didn't read a speech. He launched a warning. A warning wrapped in fury, soaked in history, and sharpened by betrayal. He looked directly into the lens, eyes locked with the world, and said words that shattered the air: Africa is not your playground. It is not your farm. And we are not your slaves. Gasps followed. The audience was stunned. Diplomats froze. Journalists looked at each other, unsure if they were hearing correctly. But Traoré continued, louder, fiercer, more defiant than ever: you come with aid, but you bring chains. You speak of peace, but your hands drip with blood. This was no political stunt. This was an eruption. A generational scream echoing through the bones of colonized ancestors. Every word he spoke hit like a hammer against centuries of silence. He reminded the world that Africa's resources had been pillaged, her children enslaved, her leaders assassinated, and the looters still wore suits, flew private jets, and gave press conferences. He didn't call out one country, he called out them all. France, the US, NATO, the UN. You disguise your greed as partnership. You label resistance as terrorism. But no more, he said. From this moment, understand clearly, Africa is awakening, and we will burn every hand that reaches for our necks. And then came the sentence that would haunt every Western strategist from Paris to DC. Leave Africa now. Or prepare to face the storm you created. Not a threat. A prophecy. He wasn't begging for independence, he was declaring war on neocolonialism. Not with bullets but with truth. Raw, unforgiving, unfiltered truth that shook the very foundation of diplomatic lies. Traoré said what others whispered in fear. He dragged the quiet rage of an entire continent into the spotlight. He spoke of coups engineered in Western embassies. Of African gold stored in European vaults. Of presidents bought, rebels funded, economies strangled. He exposed how military bases are planted not for protection, but for extraction. How NGOs are used as spies. How democracy is sold like a drug, only to collapse nations into chaos. He declared that the age of fear was over. That African youth would no longer drown in deserts trying to escape poverty created by foreign control. That if Burkina Faso must fight alone, it will. But it will not be alone for long. Africa is one wound, he said, and when one nation bleeds, the others will rise. And they are rising. Mali answered. Niger echoed. Guinea nodded. Across the Sahel, flags changed, speeches sharpened, alliances shifted. No longer East versus West but Africa versus exploitation. And in the center of that storm stood Traoré, young, unbought, unafraid. He exposed how peacekeepers shoot first and investigate never. How foreign companies mine uranium while locals live in darkness. How IMF loans come with invisible chains. He refused to shake the hands of men who funded mercenaries. He refused to smile for cameras while his people starved under sanctions. He rejected aid that came with conditions. And he dared the world to call him a villain, while showing the receipts of stolen futures. His warning wasn't just political, it was spiritual. The land speaks, he said. And it remembers. He invoked ancestors, martyrs, revolutionaries. From Sankara to Lumumba, from Biko to Gaddafi, names that send shivers through Western halls because of what they stood for, a free Africa. And what they died for, the same. He said their voices would no longer be echoes. They would be commands. And their blood would no longer be forgotten, it would be fuel. Traoré made it clear, there will be no more coups for hire. No more puppet regimes. No more extraction without consequence. If you touch one of us now, he warned, you awaken all of us. And for the first time in decades, Western leaders had no reply. Because deep down, they knew the tides were shifting. This wasn't a fringe rebellion. It was a continental reset. And Traoré wasn't just shouting, he was organizing. He called for African unity not just in politics, but in defense, in currency, in education, in narrative. No more Western curriculums that teach our children to worship invaders, he thundered. No more media owned by foreigners, feeding us lies about ourselves. He demanded satellites made in Africa. Tech built in Africa. Armies funded by African wealth. He demanded the end of CFA francs, foreign language laws, and imported identity. He demanded a new Africa, unapologetic, untamed, and uncolonized. And in the eyes of many, he became what the West fears most, a young, intelligent, charismatic rebel who can't be bribed, and can't be broken. His speech wasn't broadcast on CNN. It wasn't front page in Paris. But it exploded across WhatsApp, Telegram, and TikTok. It was played in schools, in mosques, in marketplaces. Elders cried. Youth marched. Soldiers saluted. Something had changed. Because this wasn't just a warning. It was a battle cry. And the world is finally listening.